Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on call center best practices. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in our webcast today. Before we get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During the presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen, and I will pause once during the presentation to answer questions. Additionally, I will remain on the webcast at the conclusion of today's presentation to answer any final questions that you might have or that I did not get to during the first Q&A break. This webcast typically lasts about 90 minutes. So for those of you who have other commitments later in the day, I should be wrapped up by about 3:30 or so Eastern Time in the United States. Now, I see that quite a few of our existing clients have joined us on the webcast today, and I want to thank you for that. For those who are not familiar with MetricNet, let me give you just a brief introduction. MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. We perform benchmarks for a variety of industries and functional areas. My role in the business is to manage the call center, service desk, and desktop support benchmarks and client relationships for MetricNet. The work we do for call centers worldwide spans the gambit, from benchmarking and best practice assessments to consolidation studies and outsourcing analyses. Typically, the call centers that we work with are looking to optimize their performance, and we help them achieve that objective through benchmarking. Now, for those who have not yet been to our new website, I would encourage you to go and take a look around at MetricNet.com. One of the unique features of the website is that we offer a free premium membership that gives you unlimited access to all of our content. This includes our metric of the month, our webcast recordings, white papers, and presentations. All you have to do is complete a short form, and you will be enrolled as a free member. Each time you visit our website thereafter, you can go directly to our resource library to access all of our online content absolutely free of charge. Now, since the question of how to benchmark comes up in every webcast we deliver, I'll preempt the question right now and give you just a brief overview of MetricNet's benchmarking lineup. There are three ways that you can complete a benchmark with MetricNet. First, there are peer group benchmarks that compare your call center, service desk, or desktop support performance to that of a unique peer group. These are our custom benchmarks, and they're very comprehensive in scope. The peer groups are selected from our benchmarking database based upon your call center's scope and scale, complexity, and geography. For example, it's common to select a peer group from your geography and vertical industry, and to also ensure that there is comparability in the number of contacts handled, since call centers are scale sensitive. Secondly, if you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click the Shop selection on the upper navigation bar, and you will see our call center, service desk, and desktop support industry benchmarks that are available for download. And finally, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Now, regardless of how or when you choose to benchmark your organization, I want to encourage all of you to connect with MetricNet on social media. We're active on all of the major social media sites. We put out a steady stream of posts, tweets, articles, discussions, and presentations that are designed to enrich the community of call center and IT support professionals and to provide you with tools and insights and information that you can use to enhance your professional careers. For those who would like to follow us on Twitter during the webcast, use hashtag MetricNetLive to participate, share your thoughts, key points, questions, or just to follow along. One final note before we get started, and this is particularly important for those who wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. When you exit the webcast, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please be aware that only those who complete the survey will receive a copy of today's presentation. This survey provides us with valuable feedback on the webcast. It's only 3 questions long, and it takes about 15 seconds to complete. So if you do us a favor and answer that survey at the end of the webcast, I'd be very grateful, and in return for that courtesy, I'll send you a copy of today's presentation. Let's go ahead and get started. We've got 4 things on the agenda today. We're going to start with what I call the customer contact imperative. and the fact that call centers have become far more strategically important as part of their company value chains than they have been historically. So I want to talk a little bit about how the call center has evolved away from its historical support role into a much more strategically significant position within an organization, that of being able to differentiate a company's products and services from those of the competition. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about our research methodology. I'm going to be presenting a lot of data here today. All of it is derived from some 3,000 call center benchmarks that we've done over the years. I want to talk a little bit about the origins of that data and the origins of our best practices model. Very quickly, though, within the next 5 or so minutes, we're going to get into our model for call center best practices. It's a 4-part model that reflects empirically what the most successful call centers have in common. We're going to be looking at performance measurement. We're going to be looking at how they diagnose strengths and weaknesses within their call centers. We're going to be looking at action planning, and then finally implementation, that is taking actions that result in continuous improvement in your call center environment, regardless of what kind of call center you operate, whether it's inbound, outbound, whether it's service, sales, collections, or anything else. And finally, we're going to wrap up with a call to action. I'm going to summarize what I present here today and give you at least 5 things that you can do in the near term that have the potential to make an impact in your call center. So let's get going with the customer contact imperative. If you've been in the workforce for very long at all, you know that industries are becoming more competitive. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. You can be in hospitality, you can be in financial services, you can be in retail banking or high technology. You know that literally every day there's a relentless push on competition. Some of this is driven by consolidation. Some of this is driven by regulatory pressures. The emergence of virtual businesses. We've seen virtual banks emerge. We've seen virtual mortgage companies and insurance companies emerge. Customers expect one-stop shopping when they go to Amazon or when they call your contact center. They expect to be able to get it done with one call. Shareholders want their piece of the pie. All of you operate under budgetary constraints, and your customers, just as the industry you operate in is becoming more competitive every day, customers become more demanding every day. Now, in this environment of flagging customer loyalty and lower switching costs, companies are looking for any opportunity to build a competitive advantage, to get an edge on the competition. And increasingly what they're doing is they are turning to customer contact, whether it's inbound contact or outbound contact, whether it's a live voice call, an in-person call in a brick-and-mortar facility, an email, a web chat, doesn't matter what it is. Companies are increasingly focusing on customer contact as an opportunity to differentiate themselves and to build a competitive advantage. However, the opportunity to do that in a call center is very limited. If you look at those that you frequently contact, you yourselves call your retail bank once in a while, I suppose. You may call your insurance company periodically. You may call your mortgage company. You may call your gas or electric utility periodically. Well, for those call centers that you deal with on a day-to-day or week-to-week or month-to-month basis, on average, your direct contact with them amounts to anywhere from 7 to 22 minutes per year. Now think about that. A year has 8,760 hours. Yet those call centers at the retail bank, at the mortgage company, at the insurance company, they only have 7 to 22 minutes of direct contact with you every year to make an impact. This is truly a moment of truth opportunity. It's your opportunity to make or break the customer relationship. You can add value, you can build customer loyalty, you can differentiate yourself, and you can create a competitive advantage here. Or you can do just the opposite. You can destroy value. You can reduce customer loyalty. You can reduce switching costs. You can anger the customers, and ultimately they may walk away because of a poor quality customer experience that they've had with you. So this truly is a window of opportunity. It may only represent a few minutes per year that you have direct contact with your customers, but it truly is an opportunity to differentiate your company's products and services from those of the competition and to build loyalty, to build positive word-of-mouth referrals, and to build a competitive advantage using this interface. As companies have recognized this, over the last 3 to 5 years, a new paradigm has emerged for the call center. Historically, call centers were viewed as nothing more than a support function. In fact, we had clients that told us that their call centers were really a necessary evil. Can you imagine that? thinking of your customers as a bother and your contact center as a necessary evil, but that's the way some of our clients thought of this. They were viewed as a supplement to traditional brick and mortar facilities. So if you ran a retail bank, most of the transactions took place inside a retail bank facility, and the call center was really there as a backup to the traditional brick and mortar facilities. In this environment, most call centers were playing catch up with customer needs and expectations. They were very reactive, and the goal in this environment was mere customer satisfaction. The new paradigm is very different. The new paradigm says that the call center really can be a source of value creation if we manage it correctly. And we see customer contact as a potential to differentiate our company and our products and services. We see this as a replacement in some cases for traditional brick and mortar facilities. And our goal in this call center is to stay ahead of customer needs and expectations. We want to be proactive. We don't want to be reactive. And in this environment, our goal, inasmuch as we want to create value and build a competitive advantage, customer satisfaction is not good enough. In fact, that's kind of a losing proposition. What we really want to build is customer enthusiasm. We want customers to want to do business with us, and we want to differentiate our company's products and services by virtue of the quality of service that we deliver through the call center. More than a dozen years ago, a client sent this comic to me. The comic reads, "Delight customers. Why can't we just satisfy them like we used to?" Well, because satisfied customers are not loyal customers. That represents the old paradigm. The new paradigm says that what you really want are loyal customers, customers that propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals, customers that want to do business with you, and customers that are loyal to your business and to your call center. Customer enthusiasm, also known as customer delight, is the only way to achieve that objective. What we've seen in this industry is that call centers tend to evolve through at least 3 stages. Newer call centers and call centers that have not evolved very far tend to operate in a very reactive, what we call the support stage paradigm, very much under this old paradigm. However, call centers that begin to recognize that there's an opportunity to become more proactive, more preventive, and more strategic, they enter what we would consider to be the transitional stage, where they begin to make heavy investments in training and tools and technology as they try and get out ahead of the customer needs and expectations and try and be more proactive about anticipating what customers want and need. And those who are the most successful at navigating this paradigm shift eventually become strategic stage call centers. Now, strategic stage call center anticipates customer needs and expectations. They create and drive value at the customer interface, and they truly represent a source of competitive advantage for the parent company because they are able to differentiate their company's products and services by virtue of the quality of support that they deliver through this channel. As much as anything else, today's webcast is about how to make this transition as successfully and efficiently, as quickly as you possibly can. How you migrate from the support stage to the transitional stage, how you migrate from this transitional stage to become a strategic source of competitive advantage for your company. Sadly, our research has shown that only about 5% of call centers worldwide operate in this strategic stage. Another 30%, nearly 1/3, are in the transitional stage. They are making these heavy investments in training and tools and technology to become more preventive and more proactive and more strategic. But nearly 2/3, 65%, still operate in this support stage. Our goal at MetricNet, among other things, is to help call centers understand what a support stage call center looks like and understand how much better it would be to at least be in the transitional stage, but ideally to help our clients commit to and make the migration towards becoming a strategic stage source of competitive advantage for their parent companies. Let's switch gears now and talk a little bit about how we gathered all the data that I'm going to be presenting to you today. We've been at this for a long time, 27 years now. And during that time, we've completed more than 3,000 call center benchmarks, and we have the world's largest database. It's a global database of call center process and performance indicators. We track more than 30 KPIs, everything from cost per contact and customer satisfaction to speed of answer and first contact resolution rate. We have also cataloged and created a taxonomy of nearly 80 industry best practices. These best practices address call center strategy, they address human resource management, they address call handling processes and procedures, and email handling and chat handling processes and procedures. They address technology, it addresses performance measurement and management, and it addresses what we call stakeholder communication. That's not just communication to the callers who call into the call center, but it's communication to stakeholders within your company who need to understand what your business mission is all about. So with more than 3,000 call center benchmarks worldwide, we benchmark just about every major industry: banks and financial services, telecommunications companies, healthcare companies, hospitality, insurance, manufacturing, retail, transportation, and utilities. But it's important to point out, and this is the real point of this slide, is that the best practices that I will be presenting today are largely independent of the industry that you operate in. So if you're in the hospitality industry and you're wondering, well, what do best practices look like in a telecommunications company or a retail bank or a financial services company or a utility? Well, they're largely the same as they are in your industry. There's at least 80% commonality in industry best practices from one vertical market to the next. Now, as I go through today's presentation, I'm going to use the term best practices and world-class somewhat interchangeably. But because I am going to use the term world-class call center so frequently, it makes sense to define what I mean by a world-class call center right up front. There's 4 components of the definition. The first is this: the call center consistently exceeds customer expectations, regardless of what kind of transaction you're doing. It could be a pure service transaction, it might be an inbound or an outbound sales transaction, it might be a collections transaction. But what you want to do on every transaction is exceed customer expectations. This results in high levels of customer satisfaction. So what we look for when we're trying to determine if a call center is world-class, we look to see if their customer satisfaction is in the top quartile of other call centers in their industry. Now, being high quality by itself is not good enough. You also have to manage business value, which means that you have to keep your costs at a reasonable level. We look for cost per contact below industry average levels. And if you're in a revenue-generating call center, say telemarketing or telesales, or you're in a collections call center, we look to see if the revenue you generate is above industry average levels. So the first thing is high quality. Second thing is good business value, meaning low cost, high revenue generation. The third and more subjective criteria is that you're following industry best practices. Now, what I'm presenting here today, we do a full-day workshop on call center best practices. What I'm presenting is 90 minutes of that workshop. I've essentially distilled it down to 90 minutes of what I believe to be the most germane insights when it comes to running a world-class call center. But if you're following those best practices, that's critically important. And the good news is you don't have to go out and learn this stuff by trial and error. You don't have to learn incrementally. You don't have to follow a long path reinventing the wheel to improve your call center. You can build upon the industry's proven best practices. And then finally, are you adding value on every single transaction? Do you create a positive customer experience? Does this result in improved customer loyalty? Does it create positive brand awareness? And does it increase switching costs? In other words, the customer stays with you in part because they like the quality of service that they get through your call center. These are the 4 characteristics of a world-class call center: high quality, as measured by customer satisfaction; low cost, high revenue generation; you've adopted and you're following industry best practices; and you're adding value on every single transaction. Now, graphically, I would present it this way. On page 17, I've got a 2-dimensional chart with cost on the x-axis, cost per contact, and quality is measured by customer satisfaction on the y-axis. Now, when I take the data from MetricNet's benchmarking database, and I take these 2 metrics, cost and customer satisfaction, and I plot them on a 2-dimensional chart, I get a locus of points that looks somewhat like this. The blue dots here represent data points, and they are bounded on the lower side by what we call the average performance curve, and they are bounded on the high end by what we call the best-in-class performance curve. Now, we get asked almost every day what it means to be a world-class call center. Does that mean my abandonment rate has to be under 1%? Does that mean speed of answer has to be under 15 seconds? Does that mean customer satisfaction has to be 98% and that cost per contact has to be under $10? The answer is, I don't know. But if you can tell me what your resource constraints are you constrained by resources, which almost every call center is? If you're spending $4 per call, you're going to be able to achieve 1 level of quality. If you're constrained at $100 per call, you will achieve a very different level of quality. So it really is driven by the resources you have at your disposal in order to deliver service to your customers. We work with clients that have almost no resources, but they manage to eke out a pretty good level of customer satisfaction despite the fact that they're starved for resources, and we consider them world-class. Why? Because they take those limited resources and they deploy those in such a way that they achieve the best possible outcome, the biggest bang for the buck, to put it in lay terms. By contrast, we work with some organizations that are spending $100, $200, even $300 per contact. And yes, their absolute performance is better than that $5 or $4 per contact call center, but they have not optimized to the point where we believe that they are getting the best possible benefit from that $100 or $200 or $300 that they're spending per contact. So they are not world-class. The real question is, are you taking your limited resources and deploying those in such a way that you achieve the best possible result? If you are, you will end up on this upper curve. You may be way down here at a low cost, relatively lower quality point, or you may be way up here where your costs are higher and your quality is also much higher. Once you're on that optimal curve, that world-class curve, you can make a strategic choice about whether or not you want to be lower cost, lower quality, or higher cost, higher quality, or somewhere in between. But being world-class is not about achieving any absolute level of performance for any given key performance indicator. It is about deploying your limited resources, your limited headcount, dollars, technology, everything else that may be in short supply within your call center, and deploying those in such a way that you achieve the best possible result. If you do that, you will be optimized. If you are optimized, you will end up on this upper curve. You may be way up here in the upper right, or you may be down here in the lower left. But we want to help you understand what it means to migrate to that upper curve and what it means to be a world-class call center. And that brings us to our first polling question of the day. That polling question, as you can imagine, has to do with being world-class. And the question is this: do you consider your call center to be world-class? 3 answers: yes, no, or not applicable. If you don't run a call center or are not affiliated with a call center, you can answer not applicable. Now, as you're filling that out, I just want to shout out to a few of you. We've got several hundred people on our webcast today, so we're real pleased about that. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. And I'm just going to, in no particular order, say hello to some of you. Amy Novak, thanks for joining us. Craig Davison, great to see you here. Thanks for joining us. John Flores, glad you could join us here today. Matt Nicholas, great to see you. Sherry Gangi, hope I'm pronouncing that right, great to see you. Stacy Silwani, great to see you here. Stephen Craig. So we've got a great crowd here today from pretty much every time zone in the globe. All the major time zones in the U.S., of course, but also we've got people dialing in from Australia, Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, India, and a host of other countries. It's the middle of the night your time, and I know that's an inconvenience for you, but I thank you so much for joining our webcast. Okay, most of you have weighed in on this question. Do you consider your call center to be world-class? So I'm going to share those results with you. 26% of you, based on the definition that I have just provided, do believe that your call centers are world-class. Another 57%, nearly 2/3, say no, and then 16% not applicable. Now, this is a pretty common result. It's usually about a 2-to-1 ratio, no's to yeses. In this case, it's a little bit more than 2-to-1. But for those that have been candid and indicated that you don't consider your call centers to be world-class, let me just offer some encouragement. It doesn't take that much time. It doesn't take a lot of effort to become world-class. I don't want to underestimate the level of effort it requires, but at the same time, I want to communicate to you that it is worth the journey. It is worth the effort. And it doesn't take that much time. It doesn't take that much money to make that migration from wherever you're currently performing to becoming a world-class call center. By the conclusion of today's webcast, I'm hoping that you have not only the inspiration to make that journey, but also have a clear path forward and know exactly how you need to move forward in order to achieve world-class performance in your call center. So thank you for answering that poll. We're going to move on in our best practices presentation. And at this point, we're going to switch gears, and I'm going to talk about our model for best practices. It's a 4-part model that reflects empirically what we believe the world's foremost call centers do on a day-in, day-out basis. They measure their performance. They look at those measures diagnostically to determine strengths and weaknesses. Based upon that, they develop action plans that are designed to continuously improve the call center. And then finally, they take action. They implement those action plans. So we have this four-part model, very simple but very powerful because it does reflect empirically what the best performing call centers worldwide engage in and day out. It's a holistic model. Each component of the model reinforces every other component of the model. It's a synergistic model. You don't have to be world-class in any one of these four areas. If you're just above average in each of the four areas, believe it or not, because of the synergy in this model, you will have a world-class call center. You will note that this is all arrayed around the central objective, not of customer satisfaction, but of customer enthusiasm. Let me give you a medical analogy here. If you go to the doctor, let's say that you're not feeling well or you go for an annual physical, one of the things that doctor does is they measure some key characteristics of your body. They might measure your body temperature. They might measure your blood pressure and your heart rate. They might do some blood work. They might do an EKG. But if the doctor says, gee, you're sick, go home and get better, they haven't really done anything for you. All they've done is given you some data. So what a good doctor is going to do is take those metrics, those measurements, and use them diagnostically to figure out what you need to do to feel better, to get better, to stay healthy, to get healthy. And based upon that diagnosis, they are then going to prescribe something. They may prescribe drugs, but not necessarily. They might prescribe a change in lifestyle, sleep more, drink less, smoke less. They might prescribe surgery. It could be a lot of different things, but it's up to you, the patient, to implement that prescription to get the benefit of that measurement, that diagnosis, and that prescription. So these work in continuous harmony. World-class call centers do exactly the same thing. They keep their finger on the pulse of their performance through measurement. They're constantly diagnosing what those measures mean. They will develop action plans based upon their diagnosis. And if anything characterizes a world-class call center, it's that they have a bias towards action. They act on their action plans. They implement their action plans. They have a bias towards action. So as we go through our best practices model, I'm going to start with performance measurement. Now we organize KPIs for the call center into two broad categories. There are operational metrics and business effectiveness metrics. Now the operational metrics are internally focused. They look at how well your call center is operating. Metrics like cost per contact, customer satisfaction, speed of answer, agent utilization. If you have an outbound call center or a sales call center, you're going to have a different set of metrics. But your operational metrics look at how well your call center is performing internally. By contrast, your business effectiveness metrics will look at how your call center, how effective they are in supporting the company's business mission. They're oftentimes, although not necessarily, but oftentimes related to profit and loss or revenue generation. They tend to be externally focused. Some of the key metrics include sales dollars per call center headcount. It might look at collections dollars per call center headcount. You might look at call center operating expense as a % of revenue generated. So two fundamental sets of metrics here. We're going to discuss both of them briefly. Starting with the operational metrics. What I've shown on page 23 are some of the more common operational metrics for an inbound customer service call center. We've organized them into 6 categories, as you can see. We've got cost metrics, we've got quality metrics, we've got productivity metrics, agent metrics, service level metrics, and call handling metrics. Now, I don't want to lead you to believe that this is an all-inclusive set of KPIs for a customer service call center. There are literally hundreds of KPIs that I have seen. But if I boil it down to the 20 or 25 most common metrics, these are the ones that we see day in and day out. However, this does present a dilemma. It takes a lot of time, it costs a lot of money, and it creates a lot of bureaucracy to manage all these key performance indicators. And so historically, this approach to KPIs, which was very heavy on measurement, not so much on analysis, virtually nothing on prescription or action planning, and as a result, virtually no action taken as a result of those measurements, has given way to a new paradigm. An increasing number of call centers have adopted what I call the holistic approach to performance measurement and management. It contains the same 4 blocks, measurement, analysis, prescription, and action, but it has turned it upside down, and it has de-emphasized performance measurement, because measurement by itself is a passive activity. It doesn't really drive improved performance. Measurements by themselves are interesting, I'll give you that, but unless you're willing to use them diagnostically, unless you're willing to act on them to achieve improved performance, they're useless. All they do is satisfy curiosity. And unfortunately, And the majority of call centers worldwide, that's how they use KPIs. They're a passive activity. They're an observational activity. But I want to suggest that they can be so much more, because the real value of key performance indicators is not in their ability to allow you to simply observe your performance. It's in their ability to help you diagnose your strengths and weaknesses through analysis, and then develop action plans based upon that diagnosis, and then ultimately to act on that information. So I'm suggesting that less is more when it comes to key performance indicators, and the 80-20 rule for KPIs is shown here on page 25. Again, this would be for an inbound customer service call center. We can come up with a similarly short list for outbound call centers, for revenue-generating call centers like sales or collections. But for inbound customer service, these are the metrics that really matter. We've got cost per contact and customer satisfaction. We call those the foundation metrics, because ultimately everything you do in your call center is oriented towards either cost containment or enhancing the quality of the customer experience. If your actions don't result in one of those two things, it's simply not worth doing. I don't care if you're making an investment decision, a decision about a project, a technology decision, a headcount decision, an organizational decision. If moving in that direction, if that decision does not have the ultimate effect of containing your costs or even reducing your costs or improving the quality of the customer interaction, it's just not worth doing. It's as simple as that. That might sound very draconian, but viewed through that lens of cost and customer satisfaction, this greatly simplifies decision-making in the call center. Because if you subject every decision to that simple acid test, will this enhance the quality of the customer experience in the long run, or will this help to contain or reduce our costs in the long run? If you can't answer yes to one or both of those questions, it's pretty simple. You just don't do it. But when I'm doing a benchmark for an organization and I find that their costs are high or their customer satisfaction is low, I can't just tweak costs and I can't just increase customer satisfaction without changing something else. So the underlying drivers of cost are agent utilization, and the underlying driver, the main driver of customer satisfaction, is first contact resolution rate. I do have a lot of control over agent utilization. I do have a lot of control over first contact resolution rate, so I can pull this lever to achieve better cost or scale economies, and I can pull this FCR lever to achieve better customer satisfaction. So the underlying drivers of the foundation metrics, cost per contact and customer satisfaction, are respectively agent utilization and first contact resolution rate. Agent utilization is critically important because these are labor-intensive functions. I don't care if it's a call center, a customer service call center, or a technical support call center, i.e. a service desk. These are labor-intensive, and the vast majority of your costs are tied up in your personnel. Agent salaries and benefits represent about half your total cost. If you add to that your indirect salaries and benefits for your team leads, your supervisors, your workforce schedulers, your QA/QC people, your trainers, etc., you're adding another 20% roughly to that. So with all personnel, your agents as well as your non-agents, your indirect personnel, salaries and benefits represent about 70% of the total cost of a call center. The remaining 30% is tied up in things like facilities cost, your telecommunications cost, your technology expense, and licensing fees, your travel, your training, your office supplies. But the vast majority of your expense, more than 2/3 of it, is in personnel. That is your agents and your indirect salaries and benefits. So any serious attempt to contain cost has to look at human resource productivity, and the big metric there is agent utilization. I'm going to define that metric for you in about 10 minutes here as we go through a benchmarking case study. But it's important to recognize that this is the big underlying driver of cost per contact. Your big underlying driver of customer satisfaction is your first contact resolution rate. Then on our short list, remember less is more. This is the 80-20 rule. Agent job satisfaction. People look at that oftentimes and kind of scratch their heads and ask us, why would agent job satisfaction be so important in a call center? And the answer is because it affects almost every other metric in your call center. You know, when I do a benchmark for an organization and I meet the manager of that call center or that service desk, I don't care if they know the difference between an abandoned call and an ACD. I really don't. What I do care about is whether or not they can keep their staff motivated and maintain a high level of morale within the organization. Because if they can do that, the agent job satisfaction will be high. And if the agent job satisfaction is high, turnover is lower, absenteeism is lower, customer satisfaction is higher, Cost per contact is lower because the handle times are lower. What's not to like about that? This is a bellwether metric that has a ripple effect throughout the organization. It has an indirect effect on just about every other KPI in the call center, and that's why it's on the short list of the metrics that really matter. Finally, we include an aggregate metric, specifically the balanced scorecard on the short list, and I'm going to show you how to build a scorecard momentarily. The reason we do this is because no single metric in the call center really tells the whole story. Somebody tells me customer satisfaction is great. Well, I'm happy for you, but what's in the back of my mind is, well, how much are you paying for that level of customer satisfaction? Or if someone comes to me and says, hey, our costs are really low. We're in the bottom quartile or the bottom decile of cost per contact for our industry. I'm thinking, okay, well, that's good, but what have you sacrificed, if anything, in customer satisfaction or service levels to achieve that low cost? In other words, you have to look at this holistically. You can't just look at one metric or two metrics or even the 5 metrics on this short list here. What we need is a way to roll them together, normalize them, and create a single score that shows how you compare to other call centers. And I'm going to show you in a few minutes how we create that balanced scorecard. But before I do, let's talk a little bit further about the foundation metrics, cost and customer satisfaction, or cost per contact, x-axis here. Quality is measured by customer satisfaction. What I'm showing here are the most recent 100 call center benchmarks that MetricNet has completed. The x-axis shows cost per contact, but I've sort of flipped the axis. It's a bit counterintuitive. We've got lower cost on the right. We've got higher cost on the left. So as you move to the right, this represents lower cost. Now the midline here, that is the vertical line going through the middle of the graph, represents the average cost per contact for this 100 data points. The y-axis shows quality, lower quality down below and higher quality up above. So this axis is more intuitive. The horizontal line going through the middle of this chart represents the average customer satisfaction for this group of 100 call center benchmarks. Now ideally, where you want to be in terms of your cost-quality trade-off on this chart is in this upper right-hand quadrant. This is where you are both efficient, meaning low cost, and effective, meaning high quality. Now, if you're not in that quadrant and you're, say, in this lower right quadrant, well, your costs are low, that's good, but it also means your quality is low. And over time, what you need to do is improve the quality of service that you offer to your customers and move up into this upper right-hand quadrant. Likewise, if you're in this upper left quadrant, your quality is good, but your costs are also high. And over time, you need to figure out how to become more efficient, reduce your cost, and move into this upper right-hand quadrant. And if you're in this lower left-hand quadrant, that's the worst of all worlds. Your costs are high and your quality is low. And you need to work on both dimensions simultaneously, reducing your costs and improving the quality of service that you deliver to your customers over time. But ultimately, you want to be in this upper right-hand quadrant. That's really the holy grail of running a call center, is when you're low cost and high quality. Now, the balanced scorecard is a really elegant solution to the problem of communicating aggregate call center performance. Let me show you how it's constructed. In this particular example, we've got 5 key performance indicators in our scorecard. You can see we've got cost per contact, customer satisfaction. Those are the 2 foundation metrics. We have utilization, which drives your cost per contact. We've got agent job satisfaction. Remember, that was on our short list of the metrics that really mattered. We don't have first contact resolution rate on this scorecard because this particular customer did not track it. In fact, that was one of the recommendations in their benchmark, is that you really ought to be tracking your FCR because it is such an important driver of customer satisfaction. And then we looked at a service level metric, the percentage of calls answered in 20 seconds. You can see that we overweight cost and customer satisfaction because those are the foundation metrics. We also put a hefty weight on utilization, a little bit less weight on job satisfaction, and the service level metric only gets about 10% because service levels, believe it or not, are relatively unimportant in a call center. And don't take my word for that. I'll prove it to you in a few minutes here when I show you some regression slides that show how service levels affect customer satisfaction, which is not much at all. So we underweight that metric, but we include it because everybody seems to love the service level metrics. The next step in constructing the scorecard, and by the way, those metrics weightings have to add to 100%. The next step in constructing the scorecard is for a representative benchmarking peer group. We would show the worst performer in that peer group in this column, 3rd from the left, and in the 4th column from the left, we would show the best performer in that peer group. So the worst performer in this particular call center peer group was spending $7.55 per inbound call. The best performer was spending $3.33. In terms of customer satisfaction, the worst was 75.7%, the best was 91.2%, and so on. What you would then do is put your own performance, your call center performance, in the third column from the right, and then we would calculate a metric score using this interpolation formula. The way we come up with a metric score is that we take the worst case in your benchmarking peer group, we subtract your actual performance, that's the numerator of the ratio. The denominator of the ratio is the range, which is the worst case, minus the best case. So we have a metric score that will range from 0 if you have the worst performance in the peer group to 100% if you have the best performance in the benchmarking peer group. So when you get a high score like this, 91.8%, it means that your actual performance is far closer to the best case end of the spectrum than it is to the worst case end of the spectrum. And when you get a low score, as this call center did here for percent of calls answered in 20 seconds, it means that your performance is closer to the worst end of the spectrum than it is to the best end of the spectrum. Now, the final step in constructing the scorecard is to multiply each metric score by the metric weighting to come up with a balanced score for each of the metrics in the scorecard. By the way, you can put your own metrics in here. They don't have to be the same 5 that we've shown, and you can weight them according to your own judgment about which metrics are the most important. The key thing is to go through this methodology to create this scorecard and be able to track and trend your performance over time. So once we multiply each metric score by its weighting, we come up with a balanced score for each of the 5 metrics in the far right column. When we add those together, we come up with a single number, 77.4%. You look at that and you think, well, what does it mean? Well, it doesn't mean much the first time you do it. But if you update this scorecard monthly, you're not going to update every single metric monthly. For example, agent job satisfaction, you normally update that once every 6 months, maybe once a year. But you do have the ability to update your cost per contact monthly. You can probably update your customer satisfaction monthly. You can update your utilization monthly, and so on. So as this metric moves, it's either going to go up, which is good, or it's going to go down. And so if you're tracking that metric over time and the overall trend is in the positive direction, this shows real data from a client of ours from 2011 or 2012, you can see that they updated their scorecard every month over the 12-month period of time. Shown here, the purple background is the trailing 12-month average, and you can see that the trend is clearly in the right direction. No other metric does this for you. If somebody comes to me and says, hey, my cost per contact was down last month, I'm thinking, great. What happened to customer satisfaction? And if they tell me, well, that's down too, I'm left wondering, well, are you better off or worse off this month than you were last month? The balanced scorecard really answers that question for you because it does roll together an aggregated, a disparate set of metrics, some with units of dollars, some with units of percent. It normalizes them, rolls them together, and gives you this single overall metric that tells you how you're performing. It allows you to track and trend your performance over time, and it enables you to compare your call center to other call centers, both inside and outside of your industry. Now, when we take hundreds of call centers worldwide, or literally thousands of call centers worldwide, and run them through this algorithm, the average score is only about 50%. You can see for this group of roughly 30 call centers, the average was just under 50%. The high score was above 78%. The low score was 30.8%. That was call center number 3. Call center number 9 performed the best. The call center that we just constructed this scorecard for, 77.4%, company XYZ, scored second on this group of call centers. And this is a fairly common distribution. It's very rare for a call center to get a score above 80%, and it almost never happens that a call center gets a score above 90%. By contrast, the low score is usually in the low 30s or the 20s. Very rarely do we see scores in the teens. But we have a nice bell-shaped curve. When we plot thousands of call centers, that is, we calculate their balanced score and then plot them on a histogram, we get a nice bell-shaped curve centered right above 50%, with tails running off to the right above 70% and tails running off to the left below 30%. Typically, you're going to be in the top quartile if your balanced score is above 60%. Typically, you're going to be in the second quartile if your score is between 50 and 60. You're going to be in the third quartile if you're between 40 and 50%. Typically, you're going to be in the fourth quartile if your score is below 40%. So what we've done here is we've taken a set of disparate metrics. We've come up with a single overall indicator of performance that enables us to compare to other call centers and enables us to track and trend our overall performance over time. And again, if the number is going up, that's good. That says that your performance is improving. If the number is going down, just the opposite is happening. Your performance is deteriorating over time. So that was a real quick introduction to what we call the operational metrics. Remember, two types of metrics, operational and business effectiveness. Let me address the business effectiveness metrics very briefly here. These metrics are highly dependent upon the services you're offering. There's really no standard set of metrics the way there are for the operational side of the house, the cost per contact and the call abandonment rate and the speed of answer and the customer satisfaction, et cetera. But they're generally related to things like product sales, customer retention, revenue production, or revenue recovery, meaning collection. But there's a lot of room here to be creative and come up with metrics that make sense for your business. Now, we found that in some call centers, business effectiveness will trump operational effectiveness, meaning that if you're generating good revenue, whether it's collections revenue or telemarketing, telesales revenue, inbound or outbound, generally if you're doing well on sales, nobody cares that much about the operational metrics. This really reflects a focus on revenue growth and revenue recovery, but it does allow and permit, in some cases, a bit of sloppiness on the operational side of the call center. And then we've got some metrics that kind of cross over and address both business effectiveness and operational effectiveness. Things like operating cost divided by revenue generated. That would be a metric that addresses both business effectiveness as well as operational efficiency. Let me give you just a few examples of common metrics that we see in different industries. If you work in a credit card call center, you're probably familiar with the conversion rate for cross-selling and upselling. You know, if somebody calls in and they've got your basic credit card and you want to upsell them into a gold card or a platinum card, for example, and it's going to cost them $50 or $60 per year, that conversion rate is a metric that is frequently tracked by credit card call centers. Also, for customers who are behind on their payment, if you establish a payment plan with them to get them to repay the balance outstanding, that's a metric that's commonly tracked. If you operate in a collections call center, one of the most common metrics is what's called the ABS, or the average balance saved. That represents the percentage of an outstanding portfolio of debt that you're able to collect. So if a call center agent is given a portfolio of $1 million in back debt, meaning that it's behind, it's in arrears, and they're able to collect $500,000 of that, their ABS is 50%. Promises kept. That sounds like a strange metric, but it's a very common metric in a collections environment. When you get a customer say to promise, okay, I'm going to send you $100 by Friday, I'm going to send you $350 or the next payment by Tuesday of next week, for example. Keeping track of those promises is pretty important, and you'd be surprised how much it differs within a call center by agent. Some agents are very good at having their callers keep their promises, i.e. upwards of 80%. Some are not so good. You know, they'll say, well, the customer promised this, and only 20% of their customers are keeping their promises. So promises kept is an important one. If you operate in a cable television or an ISP, internet service provider call center, you're going to be scheduling appointments typically, and the number of field service appointments you schedule is going to be indicative of your productivity. Another frequent metric is product count for new accounts. Let's say somebody signs up with your organization and they sign up for basic cable television. If you can sell them additional products like internet service, like the sports channel, like some pay-per-view movie channel, then you increase the product count. You go from 1 to 2 or 3 or 4. The higher that product count goes on an individual account, the more not only revenue you generate from that account, but typically the stickier that client becomes. In other words, they're more loyal to your particular channel. So these are examples of business effectiveness metrics that you would find in different types of call centers. And with that, I'm going to pause and answer questions that you may have typed in. So if you do have any questions, please type them in right now. I'll answer some of the questions now, and then at the conclusion of today's webcast, I will answer all remaining questions. Okay, our first question here is from Joe, and the question is, how do you measure qualitative metrics versus quantitative metrics in a call center environment? What are some good examples of where this has succeeded? Okay, quantitative metrics we all understand. Things like customer satisfaction, first contact resolution rate, cost per call, they're quantifiable. A qualitative metric would be, for example, if you're measuring agent performance, you might look at subjective factors like do they exhibit good initiative? Do they mentor other agents? Are they proactive in their job? These are subjective things that can be quantified. You can objectify them by putting them on a scale of 1 to 5. Let's say, for example, I'm giving a review to a call center agent, and I want to tell them how they're doing when it comes to mentoring and initiative and teamwork. I'm going to rate them on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 says, well, you're not really much of a team player. 5 says, you're a great team player. We love having you here. Same thing with initiative and mentoring. So what you can do, Joe, is take these subjective factors. You have to be clear about what those subjective factors are, and then you can put them on a numerical scale. Now, there's still some judgment in assigning that numerical value to the subjective factor, or the qualitative factor, as you call it. But at least you're quantifying what is otherwise very subjective or very qualitative. So you can take something subjective, you can take something qualitative, and you can put a score on it. Typically range from 1 to 5. 5 means very good, 1 means just the opposite. A little bit later in today's presentation, Joe, you're going to see an example of that when we introduce what's called the agent scorecard. Okay. Joe, another question from Joe. What is industry standard for first call resolution rate? There is no standard. It ranges depending upon what you're doing from as low as 10% to as high as 99%. There is no standard. And in fact, there are no standards on any of these metrics. So if you're looking for a standard on cost per contact or speed of answer or call abandonment rate or first contact resolution rate, you're not going to find it. What you will find is within your peer group, you will find some typical ranges and statistics. In other words, what's the low, what's the high, what's the average, what's the top quartile, second quartile, third quartile, fourth quartile. So there really is no standard for FCR. If you're in an environment like 411, meaning information, and most of that's automated now, but in some cases, in some parts of the country, you still have live operators that will pick up a 411 call. FCR in that environment is well in excess of 99%. By contrast, if you're front-ending a very technical support organization, let's say that you're doing over-the-phone troubleshooting for complex industrial equipment. Somebody calls up about a jet engine or about a very complicated telecommunications switch, a big PBX, for example. FCR in those environments is extremely low. It might only be 10 or 12%. So, Joe, it really depends upon the type of transactions that you're handling. And when you do an effective benchmark, it's done against a peer group of comparable call centers, meaning that they're similar to you in scope and scale and complexity and geography. That's really the only way that you can look at your FCR and make any sense of it. Because there is, like I said, there's no standard on FCR. It really is dependent upon the type of service that you're offering in the environment that you operate in. Okay, from Lennon, a question is, how can I get this presentation? Lennon, when you exit the webcast, just fill out the short survey, and we'll send you a PDF of today's presentation. Okay, from Denise, I know we get the slides, but do we also get a link to the audio? Yes, you will. We're going to send, Denise, for anybody who fills out the survey at the end of the webcast, or when you exit, go to webinar, a survey will pop up. Just fill that survey out, and we're going to send you a link, not just, we won't just get the slides, you will get a link to the entire presentation, the audio and the video. Okay, question, what is agent utilization? I'm going to show you that definition in about 3 or 4 minutes here from Charles. Is there an industry standard method to assess the actual cost per interaction dollar value for each call? Actual cost per interaction dollar value. I'm not sure what that means, Charles. What I can tell you is that the cost per contact that we're showing and that we look at is the total cost per contact. It includes agent salaries and benefits. It includes salaries and benefits for indirect personnel, such as team leads and workforce schedulers, supervisors, trainers, and the like. It also includes travel, training, technology, telecommunications, office supplies, facilities. It includes all costs divided by all inbound contacts. So that's how we look at cost per contact, and we measure it the same way for every call center in our benchmarking database. That way we know that when we compare cost between call centers, we're looking at them on an apples-to-apples basis. We define cost per contact exactly the same way for every call center in our benchmarking database. Okay, a question from Al. Would you go over how to measure cost per call? Okay, I just did that. From Sylvia, are you familiar with common business effectiveness metrics for scientific technical support call centers? Yes, we are. One of those business effectiveness metrics, Sylvia, would be first level resolution rate. That's distinct and different from first contact resolution rate. The reason FLR, first level resolution rate, is a business effectiveness metric is because the more you can resolve at level 1, the lower your total cost of ownership will be, in your call center, because every time you push a ticket out, say to desktop support or to end-level support, say a NOC or some applications group within your IT organization, the cost of resolving that ticket increases fairly dramatically. So first level resolution rate is one of the most important business effectiveness metrics in the type of environment that you are talking about. It's one of several, but FLR, first level resolution rate, is a proxy for total cost of ownership in technical service and support, and that is one example of a business effectiveness metric. Okay, from, let's see, Michelle. Do you have balanced scorecard for support teams? We don't do it by team, Michelle, but we do it by individual agent. And in about a half hour, as we reach the end of this presentation, you are going to see an example of a scorecard that was put together for an individual agent. Okay, there are a few additional questions, but I'm going to hold off for now because I want to continue on through our best practices presentation. At the conclusion of the webcast, I will answer every question that you've typed in. So for those whose questions I did not get to, I apologize. I will get to them at the end of the webcast. Let me close this window down, and then we're going to move on in our best practices discussion. We've talked about metrics so far. Rest assured, these next three sections go quite a bit more quickly. Let's talk about diagnosis. There is roughly a 1-to-1 correlation between call centers that benchmark on an annual basis and call centers that are world-class. This is not MetricNet being self-serving. This is MetricNet observing the data. Some of those call centers became world-class by benchmarking. In other words, benchmarking was the path and the vehicle that they used to become world-class. By contrast, other organizations managed to achieve world-class performance through trial and error. They eventually got there, and then they used benchmarking as a way to perpetuate that strong performance. In other words, benchmarking helps them stay ahead of the competition, helps them remain world-class. In a moment, I'm going to go through a case study to describe or discuss the remaining metrics that were on that short list, the 80-20 rule, when it comes to call center key performance indicators. But let me define benchmarking for you very quickly. Some of you have done benchmarking before. I've recognized a number of names of those of you who are attending our webcast today, and you've done benchmarking with MetricNet in the past. But for those of you who haven't done it or who are unfamiliar with benchmarking, let me define it very quickly for you. Benchmarking involves comparing your call center to a comparable peer group. Now, the peer group has to be comparable in terms of what you do in your call center, the scope of services you offer, the volume of contacts you handle because these are scale-sensitive functions, the geography, and the complexity. A pretty good proxy for complexity is your handle time. A 2-minute or a 3-minute handle time usually indicates low complexity. A 10, 15, 20, or 30-minute handle time usually represents much, much higher complexity. But scope, scale, complexity, and geography are the 4 dimensions that you have to get right when you're doing this comparison. Now, the comparison by itself doesn't buy you very much. It's interesting, just like KPIs are interesting, but unless they elicit some self-examination, that is looking at how other call centers that are in your industry or in your peer group are able to achieve, say, a lower cost per contact or a better first contact resolution rate or a higher customer satisfaction, that comparison doesn't buy you very much. So the most important piece of benchmarking is the diagnostic piece, which means that you determine and understand how the better performers in your peer group achieved a better result. Because if you understand how they do it, you can selectively emulate them. You can adopt and adapt those industry best practices into your own call center and ultimately build and achieve a sustainable competitive advantage. Now, the real power of benchmarking is this. Any call center can improve over time. The question is, are you going to improve through trial and error? Are you going to improve incrementally at an evolutionary pace? Or are you going to improve at a revolutionary pace by building upon the industry's best demonstrated practices? That's the power of benchmarking, is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to improve incrementally. You don't have to improve through trial and error and go through all that blood, sweat, and tears. You can improve at a revolutionary pace by building upon the industry's proven best practices. That's the real power of benchmarking. Now, earlier in this presentation, I presented this 2-dimensional chart, cost on the x-axis, customer satisfaction on the y-axis. I'm using the chart for a different purpose here. Originally, I used this chart to explain what it means to be a world-class call center. On this particular chart, I'm using it to explain what benchmarking does for you. If you're like the vast majority of call centers and you're not yet world-class, that is operating on this best-in-class performance curve, you're going to be down here somewhere, operating at a more average level. What benchmarking does for an organization is it helps optimize your performance. It identifies inefficiencies so you can reduce your cost, and it identifies opportunities to improve the quality of the customer interaction. So they say there's no free lunch, but that's not true at all. For any entity, any process, any function that is not yet optimized, there is a free lunch. Because if you're not optimized, what it means is that there are probably costs that can be eliminated, and there are opportunities to improve the quality of the customer interaction. That's what benchmarking does for you. It enables you to move from this average performance curve and move in the right direction on both of these axes, reducing your costs while simultaneously improving the quality of service that you deliver. Now, in a moment, I'm going to go through a benchmarking case study as I explain the remaining KPIs on our short list, but before I do that, I've got a couple of polling questions that have to do with benchmarking. And the first polling question is this: have you benchmarked your call center within the past year? Then there will be a second follow-on question. Okay, we're getting good participation. We typically like to get 90+% to participate in our polls. We're already up to about 70%, so that's good. Have you benchmarked your call center within the past year? So if you haven't voted on that, we're up to almost 90% now, so I'm going to close this poll down momentarily. So if you haven't voted, please vote. Have you benchmarked your call center in the past year? Yes, no, or not applicable? Okay, we just hit 90%, so I'm going to close that down, and I'm going to share the results with you, and here they are. 22% of you have benchmarked your call center within the past year. 61% of you have not, and 17% not applicable. Once again, I want to offer some words of encouragement for those of you who have not benchmarked within the past year. First of all, say for those that have done it, the 22% of you who have, kudos. If you went through the exercise, I suspect you found it to be a highly rewarding exercise. It's the quickest path to world-class performance. For those of you who have not done benchmarking, give it some thought. It's the most effective tool to accelerate the path towards world-class performance for any call center that is interested in improving their performance. So let me put up one more polling question related to benchmarking, and the polling question is this: do you plan to benchmark your call center in the future? So the last question was, have you benchmarked in the past year? This question asks, do you plan to benchmark your call center in the future? And again, we're getting good participation. We're already up to about 50%. We like to get these to about 90%, so please weigh in. If you've not voted on this, do you plan to benchmark your call center in the future? While you're filling that out, I'll just shout out again, and these are just randomly. I'm looking at the participation list here. Brian Spencer, thanks for joining us. Fallon Halder, thanks for joining us. Lawden Adams, great to have you here. Nathan Fink, glad you could join us today. Randy Lowell, thanks for joining us. Ryan Cole, great to have you here. And again, particular thank you to those that are doing this in the middle of the night or late in the evening, some of you in Eastern Europe and India, dialing in late in the evening. Okay, let me go ahead and close this poll down, and I'm going to show you what the results look like. Here they are. 14% of you are planning to benchmark your call center within the next 90 days. Another 20% are planning to benchmark within the next 6 months. 29%, almost a third, planning to benchmark within the next year, and then 24% no plans to benchmark at this time. Well, isn't it interesting that on the prior poll, have you benchmarked within the last year, the number was about 20%. And on this poll, the number that don't have any plans to benchmark is about 24%. I would like to think, and I would hope, that those that aren't planning to benchmark are the ones who have benchmarked within the past year. For those that are planning to benchmark, whether it's in the next 90 days, 6 months, or 1 year, once again, I want to offer my encouragement. Please move forward with those plans. You will find that benchmarking is one of the most rewarding exercises you can engage in. It is the quickest path to world-class performance for your call center. It allows you to bypass all the trials and tribulations associated with incremental improvement and evolutionary improvement and improve your call center at a world-class pace. And as I mentioned earlier, there's roughly a 1-to-1 correlation between call centers that have world-class performance and call centers that benchmark on an annual basis. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down, and we're going to continue on now with our benchmarking case study. And what I want to do is show you some benchmarking data here from a technical support call center, also called a service desk, that we did a benchmark for a couple of years ago. The first thing I always look at when I get benchmarking data together are the foundation metrics, which are cost per contact and customer satisfaction. For this particular service desk, the cost per contact was about $28, and the peer group was at $23. So we've got a red flag there, high cost. Customer satisfaction, the other foundation metric, they're at 63%. Doesn't sound very good, and it's not. When you compare them to the peer group at 79%, we've got another red flag. Okay, so we've got issues here. We've got high cost, low customer satisfaction. You may recall on that two-dimensional chart I presented earlier, cost versus quality, they're in the lower left quadrant. They've got customer satisfaction that is below average, and they've got cost per contact that is above average. And so what we need to do is diagnose what's going on here so that we can correct the situation. So let's start with our foundation metrics, cost per contact and customer satisfaction. They are driven respectively by agent utilization and first contact resolution rate. How do we know this? Well, it makes common sense, but we also have the data to prove it. On this chart, what I'm showing is agent utilization on the x-axis. As you move to the right, you get higher utilization. The y-axis shows cost per contact. The blue diamonds are data points, and the red line is the linear regression through the data. As you improve utilization in any labor-intensive function, your cost is going to go down. The slope here is about 1 to 2, meaning that you get about a 1 percentage point decrease in cost for every 2 percentage point increase in utilization. Why? Because your agent salaries and benefits represent about 50% of your total cost. Hence, it takes a 2% improvement in utilization to get a 1% reduction in cost per contact. Here's how we calculate agent utilization. This was a question that came up in the brief Q&A session I did a few moments ago. We look at inbound contacts handled by an agent in a month, and we multiply that by the inbound handle time. We add to that outbound contacts handled by an agent in a month, multiplied by outbound handle time. Now, these can be live voice, they can be chats, they can be emails. It doesn't matter what channel they come in from, but you're measuring, or you're adding up the inbound workload and the outbound workload, and you're dividing it by the number of work minutes in a month, which is about 9,800 in case you ever wondered. Here's an example of that. Let's say that there's an agent handling 375 inbound contacts per month, placing 225 outbound contacts. Inbound handle time is 10 minutes. Outbound handle time is 5 minutes. These are just made-up numbers to illustrate how the calculation works. And if you run the numbers, it ends up being about 50.4% agent utilization. Now, keep in mind that we have not backed out sick days, vacation days, training time, administrative time, idle time where you're wearing the headset and no calls are coming in, for example. And worldwide, when we measure utilization that way, it's only about 50%. It ranges from a low of about 20% to a high of about 75%, but the average call center agent utilization is only about 50%. So we get questioned all the time when we present these benchmarks that we do to our clients. They're always shocked by this number. Oftentimes it's because they're confusing occupancy or schedule adherence, for example, with utilization. And occupancy is a very, very different metric, as is schedule adherence. You can have a very high occupancy and a very low utilization. That is, if you're jacked in, you're wearing the headset, and you're logged in, the vast majority of time, but there are no calls, your utilization will be very low, but your occupancy will be very high. So people are oftentimes shocked that this number is so low. It doesn't mean that the agents are goofing off half the time. It doesn't mean that at all. But again, we do not back out sick days, vacation days. We don't back out holidays, training time, idle time, training time, or administrative time, or anything else. And the number worldwide for agent utilization is about 50%. Now here's the relationship between FCR, first contact resolution rate, and customer satisfaction. Blue diamonds are data points, and the red line is a linear regression. Here the slope is about 1 to 1. It takes about a 1 percentage point improvement in FCR to yield a 1 percentage point improvement in customer satisfaction. How do you improve FCR? Well, there's a lot of ways. You could do it through training, that is giving your agents better training. You can do it by sometimes just establishing a first contact resolution rate performance goal. Goes a long ways towards improving FCR performance. You can do it through technology, for example, having a knowledge management tool that enables you to resolve more contacts on that initial contact. Or you could do it through a remote diagnostic tool. Let's say you're in a tech support environment and you proxy into a user's computer using a tool like BombGuard or GoToAssist or LogMeIn or one of the other tools that are available. That technology can help you improve and increase your first contact resolution rate. Let's drill down further. We've looked at the foundation metrics. They are driven respectively by utilization and first contact resolution rate. Let's look at how service levels drive agent utilization, because if we find that cost is high and utilization is low, that makes sense. Or costs would be high if your utilization is low, and that's the case with our case study here. We need to drill down further and find out if service levels are the culprit. If you look at speed of answer and you plot that against cost per contact, it's probably not surprising to you that as the ASA gets lower, the cost goes up. And if you've been in workforce scheduling, or even if you haven't been in workforce scheduling, you know why this is the case. As the speed of answer decreases, you need to add headcount in order to answer the phones more quickly. And that, of course, increases your costs. So naturally, as the ASA gets higher, your costs go down. As the ASA gets lower, your cost goes up. Same thing is true of abandonment rate. As you go to a more aggressive service level on abandonment rate, your costs also go up. But here's the kicker. Too many people in this industry assume that aggressive service levels are necessary to keep customers happy, meaning that we need a low abandonment rate and we need a low speed of answer or customers will not be happy. But the data suggests otherwise. What I'm showing here is the same data from these two charts, but this time, instead of looking at ASA and abandonment rate versus cost, I'm looking at ASA and abandonment rate versus customer satisfaction. Moreover, the x-axis here, ASA, is not pure ASA in seconds. It's ASA divided by handle time. Why have I done that? Well, because customers are smart enough to know that if they make a 411 call, an information call, they expect that call to be answered in 1 or 2 seconds. By contrast, if they're looking for technical support and they've had experience with your service desk and they know that the handle time is 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes, they're okay waiting 2 or 3, maybe even 5 minutes. So we look at ASA not in absolute seconds, but as a percent of your total handle time. And what the data tells us is that if your ASA is less than 10% of your handle time, you're fine. But it doesn't make sense to be more aggressive than that because it doesn't buy you anything in terms of customer satisfaction. So let's say your handle time is 10 minutes. What this is saying is that you're fine with a 1-minute ASA. Now, if you get too egregious and you go out to 2, 3, or 4 minutes, you will see a drop-off in customer satisfaction. So this suggests that there's a sweet spot on ASA, somewhere in the range of 8 to 10%. You want to get in that range to avoid falling off this customer satisfaction cliff, but you don't want to get any more aggressive than that because your costs will go up. The same thing is true when it comes to abandonment rate. We find that there's a sweet spot in the range of 6 to 8%, and as long as your abandonment rate is in that range, you're not in danger of falling off the customer satisfaction cliff over here on the right, but you're also not buying a more aggressive service level than you need. In other words, you're not increasing your costs unnecessarily. This is a critical point because too often in this industry, we find call centers, technical support centers, and the like are pursuing aggressive service levels for no good reason. They simply don't understand that aggressive service levels don't buy you customer satisfaction. Customers are willing to forgive you an occasional abandoned call or an occasional long speed of answer. What they're not willing to forgive is incompetence as measured by first contact resolution rate. In other words, if they know that when they reach you, there's a reasonable chance, a very good chance that you will resolve on first contact, they're going to be okay with that, even if the speed of answer seems a little bit long, even if they occasionally abandon a call. So service levels do not drive customer satisfaction, but they do drive costs. It's a dual-edged sword. You need to understand this trade-off, and you need to understand that there's a sweet spot for both ASA as a percentage of handle time and call abandonment rate. Let's go back to customer satisfaction, that foundation metric driven by first contact resolution rate, as you saw. Well, it turns out that training hours are a big driver of FCR. Training hours are not just motherhood and apple pie. You know, if everybody in this industry who talked the talk on training hours also walked the walk on training hours, there would be a whole lot more training going on. Here we show new agent training hours on the x-axis versus FCR, first contact resolution rate, on the y-axis. Blue diamonds are data points. Red line is a linear regression. As the training hours increase, so too does the FCR. And we know that FCR also drives customer satisfaction. So training hours are an indirect driver of customer satisfaction. What about annual training hours? As the number increases each year, these are after the initial training. How many hours of training annually do your agents get? As that number increases, so too does the FCR. All of these blue diamonds here on the y-axis, these are call centers that do not provide any ongoing training for their agents. In other words, the training hours are 0 on an annual basis. Some, depending on the environment, depending on the industry, may offer as much as 120 hours of annual training. You can see that as the training hours increase, so too does first contact resolution rate. Agent job satisfaction. By the way, you may have noted that some of these metrics are in red. The ones that are in red are the ones that are on our short list of the metrics that really matter. These are the 80-20 rule metrics. Agent job satisfaction, I mentioned earlier, is a bellwether metric that has an impact on just about every other KPI in your call center. It impacts both customer sat as well as your absenteeism and turnover. Here's how it impacts customer satisfaction. X-axis is agent satisfaction, Y-axis is customer satisfaction. Ideally, you want to be measuring agent job satisfaction annually or twice per year. Annually is usually good enough. Some of our clients will do it twice yearly. It doesn't take a lot of time. It literally takes about 20 to 25 minutes for an agent to fill out an agent satisfaction survey. So you can see that agent job satisfaction does drive customer satisfaction, and it is inversely correlated to turnover, meaning that the higher the agent job satisfaction goes, the lower the turnover is. Why would we care about that? Because turnover is very costly. It costs, on average, in North America to replace a call center agent about $10,000. That's the cost of finding the person, screening them, testing them, training them, and then once they start work, they're not immediately productive. It takes them a while to work their way down the learning curve. And so it is very costly. Turnover is extremely costly, and you want to do everything you can to minimize that. One of the big drivers of turnover is agent job satisfaction. If you can maintain that, and this gets back to a point I made very early in this presentation, maintaining morale and hence job satisfaction is a key to keeping the turnover down and keeping the absenteeism down. And that brings us to our final polling question of the day. And as you can imagine, it has to do with agent job satisfaction. And the polling question is this: do you track agent job satisfaction in your call center? Yes, no, or not applicable. Do you track agent job satisfaction? And by the way, for anybody who's looking for an agent job sat survey, we can send you a sample. It's pretty straightforward. As I said, it only takes about 20 to 25 minutes for an agent to fill that survey out. But it is critical to know what they're thinking. And by the way, you're not just asking them, do you like your job? There are usually about 5 questions, and then there's a free form part on the response form where they can tell you what they think, get things off their chest, tell you how you can improve things, tell you how you can manage their career more effectively. Okay, almost 90% of you have weighed in on this, so if you haven't voted, please do so. Do you track agent job satisfaction in your call center? Okay, let's take a look at those results. A third of you do. 50% are not tracking agent job satisfaction, and then 17% not applicable. You know, as recently as 2 years ago, the yeses on this poll were about 10%. So it's nice to know that we're up to about a third now measuring agent job satisfaction. For the 50% of you on this call that are not measuring agent job satisfaction, I want to encourage you to consider tracking that metric. It is a bellwether metric. It has an indirect effect on just about every other KPI in the call center. And it's very diagnostic in nature. You'll learn a lot by tracking your agent job satisfaction. So I'm going to go ahead and close that poll down, and then we're going to continue on now with our best practices discussion. And specifically, we're going to continue building out this cause and effect diagram here that we put together for the KPIs. Let's look at training hours and how it affects agent job satisfaction. We already know that it affects first contact resolution rate. So here's annual training hours versus agent job satisfaction. Yeah, agents like training. And so when we put all this together, what we have is this cause and effect diagram of the major KPIs. The ones in red are on our short list of the metrics that really matter. And you can see that agent job satisfaction, and by the way, in this industry, it's at epidemic low levels, which is why turnover in this industry is so high. The average call center turnover in North America last year was about 40%, which means that the average agent only hangs around for about 2.5 years. Some of the call centers that manage their agents more effectively are able to get that number under 10%. Some of those that don't do such a good job at managing their human resources will see turnover in excess of 100%, meaning that the average agent doesn't even hang around for a year. The 3 big levers you have to impact agent job satisfaction is the amount and quality of coaching that those agents receive. It's the existence of a bona fide documented career path, meaning that they can go somewhere either in the call center or beyond the call center, and it's the amount of training that they receive. So agent job satisfaction doesn't just happen. It is controllable, and these are the big 3 drivers of agent job satisfaction. So now that we've got this cause and effect diagram, this is very powerful. It helps us understand what levers we can pull to achieve desired outcomes. So when we go back to our benchmarking data, high cost, low customer satisfaction, we know that the big driver of cost is agent utilization, so let's look at that number here. 46.7% utilization versus the peer group at 53%. Okay, that's our first smoking gun, is that utilization is low, so that is going to drive high cost. What drives utilization? Well, service levels are a big one. So let's look at the service levels. The ASA was 18 seconds versus 45 seconds for the peer group. The abandonment rate was 2.9% versus 8.1% for the peer group. When I asked this call center, this technical support call center, why they had a 20-second or an 18-second ASA and a 2.9% abandonment rate, the answer was the CIO told us to keep the ASA under 20 seconds and the abandonment rate under 3%. That's a classic example of a person assuming that your aggressive service levels are going to drive high levels of customer satisfaction, but it just wasn't the case. And so the short diagnosis here was pretty straightforward. It said, okay, you don't need these aggressive service levels. Let your ASA drift up to 45 seconds or a minute. Let your abandonment rate drift up to 6 or 7%. You're going to be fine with that. In so doing, your headcount needs will not be quite as great as they are right now. In other words, if you attrit, if you downsize a little bit, your utilization will improve and your cost per contact will go down, and that's exactly what happened. Now, their turnover was about 30% per year, so when you have turnover and you need downsize, that works in your favor. You don't have to lay people off. You can attrit, which means that as they leave, you simply do not backfill. So they downsized by, it was 5 or 6 FTEs, I forget the exact number, and within 90 days, they were back up to about 55% utilization as a result of not backfilling the attrition, and their cost per contact was down to around $21. Pretty straightforward diagnosis once you understand this cause and effect relationship between the important KPIs. Let's look now at customer satisfaction. At 68.4%, they're quite a bit below the peer group. We know from this chart that FCR is your big driver of customer satisfaction, so let's look at that. First contact resolution rate, 51.3%. That's quite a bit below the peer group of 71.2%. What's the big driver of FCR? Well, one of them is your training hours. So let's look at their training hours. New agents get 36 hours of training. That's almost nothing for a technical support agent. The peer group was at almost 2 full weeks, 79 hours. Annually, their agents got 12 hours of training. The peer group got 34 hours of training. So the diagnosis here was also pretty simple. It's focus on, give them a little bit more training, establish a goal around FCR, and over time, I think you're going to find that your first contact resolution rate will improve. And that's exactly what happened. They increased their new agent training hours. Actually, they went to 120 hours. On their annual basis, they went to 40 hours of training with specific modules on the importance of first contact resolution rate. And within 180 days, they saw their FCR go to almost 80%, and their customer satisfaction, which had been 63%, was almost 85%. So when you understand how the KPIs are interrelated and how they interact with each other, what this linkage is, it puts a lot of power in your hands because it gives you the ability to pull the levers you need to pull to achieve desired outcomes, and that's exactly what happened here. So let's move on. We've talked about the KPIs, less is more. We've talked about benchmarking as a diagnostic tool. Let's now look at prescription. There are 4 slides here. I call them cheat sheets because they give you insight into what you need to do when you identify a performance gap in your call center. The first cheat sheet addresses performance measurement. The next one addresses human resource management. The next one addresses your call handling processes and procedures. And the last one deals with technology. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard this paradigm: people, process, technology. That pyramid really is a paradigm that reflects what most people believe about call centers, which is that you develop your human resources first, you recruit effectively, and then you train them effectively, you give them the tools they need to do their job well, and then you develop processes that are repeatable that allow your agents to self-actualize, if you will, on the job. They have these common set of processes they use, and they come down a common learning curve on those processes so you can continuously improve those common processes. And then finally, technology is there to be a slave to people and process. In other words, technology doesn't drive people and process, just the opposite. Your technology is there to automate common functions, to fill out tickets, for example, to reduce cycle time, to provide knowledge through a knowledge base, or to provide remote diagnostic capability as an example. So the technology is there to enable the people and the process, not to replace them. But I would submit that there is an even more fundamental building block even ahead of human resources, and that would be performance measurement and management. And the reason I say that is because no call center that has ever achieved world-class performance did so without a strong performance measurement and management discipline. So we believe KPIs, specifically the discipline of performance measurement and management, is even more fundamental than human resource management. So we see this as the base building block, then people, process, and technology. Now, let me explain how you would interpret these charts. I'll use the human resources chart as an example. We've listed some of the more common best practices in human resource management here. The shorthand is in the left-hand column. The lengthier description is in this center column here. So let's just pick one, career pathing. Career paths have been formalized and documented. They often include vertical as well as lateral promotion opportunities, vertical meaning managerial, lateral meaning technical. Performance levels required for advancement are clearly articulated. Agents are encouraged to take charge of their own career and skills development. Now, you'll find here a set of cells on the right. Some are white, some are dark blue, some are light blue. You will also find some KPIs in the upper right-hand corner here. I call them the affected KPIs. You'll see that we've got cost per call, customer satisfaction, utilization, and then we've got the business effectiveness metrics over here. At the intersection of the best practice and the affected KPIs, you will find a cell that is either white, dark blue, or light blue. If there is a dark blue, if the cell is dark blue, it means that there is a strong cause and effect relationship between the KPI and the best practice. So we know that turnover is strongly affected by career pathing, meaning that if agents have a bona fide career path that's been documented and they're encouraged to take charge of their career, that has a positive impact on turnover, meaning it reduces turnover. By contrast, if we look at handle time versus career pathing, there's little or no cause and effect relationship there. So the gist is this. If you do a benchmark and you find that you have a performance gap in any one of these key performance indicators here, all you have to do is go down, and you can do this for performance measurement, you can do it for call handling processes, you can do it for technology. You go down the column and you ask yourself, what best practice can I implement or improve upon in order to close this performance gap? So we find, for example, that call quality has a weak influence. So light blue means weak influence, white means no influence, and dark blue means strong cause and effect relationship. So white, no influence on the KPI. The best practice does not influence the KPI. Light blue means there's a minor influence on the KPI by the best practice. Dark blue is a strong cause and effect relationship between the best practice and the affected KPI. So first contact resolution rate is strongly affected by training. It is relatively unaffected by recruitment. It is also strongly affected by establishing a performance standard. I mentioned that earlier. Sometimes simply establishing a performance goal around first contact resolution rate goes a long ways towards improving performance in that area. So this is how you can use this set of charts. When you're trying to improve on any one of these metrics, simply look at what you need to do vis-a-vis these industry best practices in order to close a performance gap. Now, the operational metrics have been kept separate up here, whereas I've combined the business effectiveness metrics. And the reason for that is that the business effectiveness metrics tend to move together. The operational metrics tend to move independently, which is why we encourage development of a balanced scorecard. Because they do move so independently, it's difficult to get your arms around 3 or 4 or 5 metrics and answer the question, are we trending in the right direction? Are we improving over time? And so we have to separate those metrics out when we're looking at these cause and effect diagrams. But for the business effectiveness metrics, they do tend to move together, and that's why we've lumped them together here on this set of charts. So this is how you would use these. I call them cheat sheets. We use them all the time at MetricNet when we do a benchmark and we identify a performance gap in any one of these areas. We just pull these out and we start listing off the best practices that need to be adopted, improved, modified, whatever the case might be, in order for the organization to improve its performance. The reason is that process drives performance. You can't improve your performance. All these metrics up here, your quantifiable performance, you can't improve those without modifying, adopting, or changing in some way the underlying processes around performance measurement, human resource management, call handling or incident or ticket handling, and technology. Okay, let's take a look at the final element of our best practices model. This has to do with implementation. We've talked about less is more when it comes to KPIs. We've talked about the importance of benchmarking your performance on an annual basis. I've shown you some ways that you can develop action plans that will enable you to improve your performance. And now we're at the point where we've done those 3 things And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where we need to actually act on all this insight. You need to know that call center best practices is a very holistic discipline. In the near term, it's designed to help you improve your performance, and if you stick with it, that is, you continuously adopt and improve upon these best practices, you will achieve world-class performance. There's no detours, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. You will become a world-class call center if you follow the industry's best practices. But the key to getting results is to take action. For those of you who were around in the 1990s, Nike had an ad campaign called Just Do It, and that's really what applies here when it gets to this point in the management of your call center. If you've measured effectively, if you've diagnosed properly, if you've developed an action plan, now's the time to just do it and implement the action plan. What I've shown on page 68 is a very simplified action plan that was undertaken by a client of ours a few years ago that really started out behind the 8 ball. They were worse than support stage when it came to their maturity. But they had a plan to become world-class within 1 year. That is, migrate through the transitional or the growth stage to the strategic stage. And there were 8 key elements to their action plan. Number 1, document call handling standards. Number 2, create and adopt a balanced scorecard. Number 3, let's start surveying customers. They had not been doing that, and you'd be surprised how many call centers don't actually serve their or survey their customers. They established an agent career path. They started doing root cause analysis to determine what was driving their call volume, because the best call is the call that's never placed, not because the caller doesn't want to reach you, but because they simply do not have the issue, whether it's a billing problem, a customer service issue, or anything else. Many of those calls can potentially be eliminated through root cause analysis. They defined agent performance standards. They rewrote their IVR menus, and then they adopted Witness Verint as their call monitoring tool. They actually did all this stuff within 12 months, and they went from being a very lackluster performer to being one of the best call centers in our benchmarking database. It's also possible to prioritize your action plan this way. We're showing 3 dimensions on this chart. We've got the x-axis, which shows the impact from low to high of each one of these action items, whatever your action plan might have in it. We showed 8 items on this particular chart. And then we show the cost on the y-axis, high cost, high up, low cost, down below. And then we color code each action item according to its urgency. Red color code means high urgency, yellow means moderate or medium, green means relatively low urgency. And you can clearly see here where the low-hanging fruit is. Recommendation number 1 or action item number 1, for example, has a higher impact than action item number 8, and it's much, much less costly than action item number 8. So you would obviously do 1 before you do number 8. That's sort of the low-hanging fruit rule. You're probably going to do number 2 before you do number 8. There's a lot of stuff you're going to do here before you do numbers 8 and number 6, because action items 6 and 8 are relatively high cost. And even though they have a high impact, they are more costly and hence more risky. So you want to focus initially on the low-hanging fruit. Take advantage of the opportunities to improve your performance that don't take a lot of time or cost a lot of money, and see some real improvement gains in a relatively short period of time. It's important when you embark upon your action plan to establish performance goals, otherwise you're not going to know if you've achieved the performance gains that you were expecting to. We make a distinction here between goals that are established for the call center and goals that are established and pushed down to the agent level. The call center is not an animate being. They're not a living, breathing entity, and so they can't respond to goals. But agents can, and that is why you need to push performance goals down to an individual agent level. So it's okay to have call center goals, but just be aware that if you don't push these down to the individual agent level, you're probably not going to achieve the call center performance that you desire. Generally, the agent goals are a little bit higher than the call center goals. Just in case some of the agents don't meet those goals, you can still potentially hit your call center goals. But it is critically important to define a set of performance goals that get driven down to the individual agent level. Otherwise, you're not going to achieve the level of performance in your call center that you desire. Now, in the first Q&A session, there was an individual that asked me about, well, there were 2 things. One is qualitative metrics, which are shown in this scorecard, and the other was a scorecard for the team. Now, we don't do team scorecards, but you could certainly create a scorecard like this for your team. Mechanically, this operates exactly the same as the overall call center balance scorecard. In this particular case, it's an agent scorecard, CSR, meaning customer service rep scorecard. You can see we've got 7 metrics in the scorecard. We weight these metrics accordingly. Even the qualitative metrics like teamwork and initiative and mentoring are weighted and put on a scale of 1 to 5. Now what you've done here is you've created an objective way of delivering feedback to the agents that work in your call center. For those of you who have delivered feedback or received feedback, which is pretty much everybody on this call, including myself, you know that a lot of times the feedback you deliver or receive is very subjective. It's kind of like, hey, you're doing a great job, but I feel like you could maybe take on a bigger leadership role, or I think that you could probably do better with your first contact resolution rate metric. It tends to be squishy, subjective type stuff. But by putting it in a scorecard like this, you can objectify and quantify what is otherwise very subjective feedback, so that when you sit down with your agents every month and you deliver their feedback, there's no misunderstanding, there's no ambiguity, because you have objectified what is otherwise or typically a very subjective process. So this particular agent sees that they're doing a great job on customer satisfaction, they're doing a great job on mentoring, they're not doing so well on utilization, meaning that their time is not utilized very effectively, and they're doing only so-so on initiative. So by looking at the low scores, they know where they need to improve, and by looking at the high scores, they are encouraged for their strengths, if you will, but shown exactly where they need to improve their performance. So this is an extremely valuable tool for delivering objective feedback to your agents. Most of our clients go even a step further, and they will post the performance of their agents monthly in a public location. Now, they don't list the agents' names. You don't want to embarrass anybody. That's not the point of doing this. But the point of doing it is to help, let's say, agent number 27. They scored 17th this month. Their balanced scorecard was 43.7%. You can see the 6-month trend in their score, and they have been improving, which is a good thing, but they still have a long ways to go to get into the upper quartile if that's what their goal is. Now, again, this is not meant to make anybody uncomfortable, and we do realize that this is somewhat controversial, but increasingly the call centers we work with are adopting not only the agent scorecard, but they are adopting this mechanism to help every agent understand how they are performing. This has 2 advantages. One is that those that are really motivated are going to get their act together and start improving their performance month over month and hopefully improve over time. Those that are really in the wrong position and they're just month after month after month getting these low scores, at some point they will probably self-attrit out. They will look at the score and say, you know, this just isn't the job for me, I'm not good at it, or this really isn't what I was expecting. And when someone self-attrits out that's underperforming, that's not a bad thing. That's not bad turnover. Some people might think of it as bad turnover, but if you have an underperformer, a lower performing agent, and they decide to leave on their own volition, that's probably not a bad thing. Now, the question around, can you do this for a team? Absolutely, you can do this for a team. You can create a scorecard for a team, for an individual, or for the entire call center. Mechanically, it works exactly the same way as the scorecard I introduced earlier, the overall call center scorecard, and you can just repurpose this for your team or for individuals in your call center. So let's put all this together, and let me summarize for you. We've looked at our 4-part model for call center excellence that looks at performance measurement, benchmarking, action planning, and then finally action. To summarize, begin by measuring your performance. Make a distinction between operational metrics, which look internally, and business effectiveness metrics, which are typically externally focused. They look at revenue production typically. But remember, less is more. The 80-20 rule applies when it comes to your key performance indicators. You should be benchmarking at least once a year against a common peer group, or a comparable peer group, I should say. Select the right peer group, use the metrics that have been identified in this webcast, the short list of metrics, look for your performance gaps, and then diagnose why those gaps exist, just like the case study we went through. And then develop an action plan based on the gap analysis, the best practices that I showed you. Go for the low-hanging fruit first. You want to get some singles before you hit for the fences or swing for the fences. Do what's realistic in the short term, but here's the acid test when it comes to your action plan, is that every action should either reduce cost, improve customer satisfaction, or enhance revenue production. If the action does not have one or more of those 3 effects, you're just not going to do it. It doesn't make any sense to do it. So your action plan has to produce one of those 3 results, and then implement it. But build buy-in up front, not only with your team and those who are working on the action plan, but other key stakeholders as well. Assign ownership and accountability. Remember the performance goals we talked about. Monitor your progress using those performance goals, but you should absolutely expect and be able to measure positive change within the organization. So the bottom line on call center best practices is this. Call center is now being managed as a strategic asset within the organization, one that has the ability to differentiate a company's products and services, has the ability to drive customer loyalty and increase switching costs, and create a competitive advantage for your organization. Strategic call centers have a number of success factors in common. They're viewed and managed strategically as a source of competitive advantage. They're not viewed as a support function. They're viewed as an opportunity to differentiate a company's products and services. They understand what it means to be world-class, and they seek to add value on every transaction, thereby creating customer enthusiasm. They use metrics diagnostically. They benchmark once a year. They invest in technician training, coaching, and career pathing. It's not just motherhood and apple pie for them. They actually walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And they have a bias towards action. That is, they act on their diagnoses. They act on their action plans. They have a bias towards continuous action, continuous improvement. Now, in a minute, I'm going to get to the questions that are queued up, that have been typed into the dialog box, and conduct a Q&A session. But before I do the Q&A, I'd like to make a few closing remarks. There's a number of things that you can do almost immediately to leverage some of the insights that you may have gained here today. First, I want to encourage all of you to take a look around our new website at MetricNet.com. One of the unique features of the website is that we offer a free premium membership that gives you unlimited access to all of our content. And this includes our Metric of the Month, our webcast recordings, white papers, and presentations. All you have to do is complete a short form and you will be enrolled as a free premium member. And each time you visit our website thereafter, you can go directly to our resource library and access all of our online content absolutely free of charge. I would also suggest that you connect with us on social media, where we put out a steady stream of information that call center and IT support professionals might find useful. We have 4 LinkedIn groups as well as a LinkedIn company page, and we also have 4 Google Plus communities and a Google company page. We're active on Facebook and Twitter, and we have a MetricNet YouTube channel. In the copy of the presentation itself, we have provided links to all of our social media pages and groups. Don't forget to register for our upcoming webcasts. We've got them scheduled out through November of this year. Next month, June of 2014, we're going to be addressing call center key performance indicators, and then in July we go to service desk best practices and then service desk KPIs in September. So please sign up. Our webcasts will always remain free. Feel free to browse through our resource library on MetricNet's website, where you'll find a number of white papers, presentations, magazine articles, and call center benchmarking and industry best practices. And for those who are interested in benchmarking, there are 3 ways that you can complete a call center, service desk, or desktop support benchmark with MetricNet. We've got our peer group benchmarks, which are the most comprehensive and diagnostic, industry benchmarks, which can be purchased right off our website, and then for those that want to do it themselves, you can purchase a benchmarking data file from MetricNet. You can reach MetricNet in the United States at this phone number, 703-992-7559. You can also fill out a form on our website if you want to reach us that way, or you can send us an email at info@metricnet.com. Now, for those who have time to stay on for a few more minutes, I will be answering any questions that you typed in during the webcast. And for those who must exit the webcast at this time, I want to thank you for attending the session. I do hope you found it to be informative and insightful. Please remember to complete the brief survey that pops up when you exit the webcast. This is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. So thank you once again. Let's take a look at the questions that we've got now queued up in the dialog box. Okay. Okay, a question from Jen. For agent satisfaction, what is considered the better way of incenting agents? Is it monetary incentives, education, leader engagement, specifically in situations with attendance management issues? It's all of the above. You know, there's some dogma in the industry, Jen, that says that people are not motivated by money. They're motivated by other things like pats on the back and attaboys, attagirls, that kind of thing, but that's not true. Everybody is motivated to a certain degree by money and by monetary incentives. However, I have been amazed at how creative some organizations can be through gamification. You're probably familiar with that term, and how some call centers create literally daily, hourly, weekly, monthly contests where prizes are given awards that are relatively low cost. In other words, there's no incentive compensation per se, but agents on an hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, and annual basis have an opportunity to earn rewards. Some of those rewards are, a gift card for the mall, like a $25 or $30 gift card. Some of those are an afternoon off. Some of those are movie tickets. Some of those are your team gets recognized and you get to do a pizza party with your team. There are many non-monetary incentives that work pretty well. So I don't want to completely discount monetary rewards, because everybody is motivated to a certain degree by money. But I have seen, particularly through gamification, that non-monetary rewards can go a long way towards driving the kinds of behavior you want in your call center: high productivity, high morale, low absenteeism, and all of the behaviors that you're trying to drive in your call center. So there's been quite a bit of research done on this. In fact, we're in the middle of doing a project right now on non-monetary incentives for call center agents. And there's a huge amount of information out there, but I just want to encourage you, if you're going in that direction, to know that there are non-monetary ways that you can drive your agents. There are incentives that you can put in place that are not necessarily monetary in nature, or the monetary component of those is relatively low cost, meaning things like gift cards, $30 gift cards, movie tickets, and the like. Okay. For Eddie, can you talk about workforce management metrics and best practices at a high level? Workforce management is a fairly complex topic, as you know, Eddie. I don't know if you are in the business of doing workforce management for your call center, but metrics that we care about on workforce management, main one is schedule adherence. And then there are some secondary metrics like agent utilization and occupancy that reflect on workforce management. But those are three of the more important metrics. The whole topic of workforce management and the metrics around the effectiveness of workforce management is reasonably complex. I mean, we could go on for a couple of hours on that topic. So what I would encourage you to do is send me an email if you want to schedule some time with me to talk about the workforce management metrics. I mentioned three of them that are indicative of effective workforce management. But ultimately, in particularly larger call centers, workforce management is the biggest driver of technician productivity and technician utilization. So if you get workforce management right, you're going to get good utilization out of your human resources. Okay, from Jan, what are some of the factors that are used to measure customer satisfaction? There are a variety of factors, Jan, that are typically included in a customer satisfaction survey. You can break it down into two broad categories. There are agent soft skills. For example, did the agent show empathy? Did the agent demonstrate good bedside manner, for lack of a better description? Did the agent have the soft skills that are necessary to handle a call effectively? And then there are the hard skills, the technical skills, if you will, the knowledge, the ability to solve problems, the ability to sort out a billing error, the ability to provide quality, actionable information to the caller. So typically the questions in a customer satisfaction survey break out into the customer service soft skills and then the knowledge skills, if you will. And both of those are important to have an effective transaction. What I would suggest is that you keep the number of questions relatively limited in the customer satisfaction survey. We prefer to see less than 10 for sure, but some of the most effective customer satisfaction surveys only have 5 or 6 questions in them. Usually you give the customer a scale of 1 to 5, and you give them a series of statements like the agent responded to my question effectively. 1 says I totally disagree, 5 says I strongly agree. Another question says the agent was prompt and courteous in handling my transaction. 1 says I strongly disagree, 5 says I strongly agree. So you're going to look at a series of soft factors, that is agent soft skills, as well as technical factors, meaning that the knowledge of the agent and whether or not they're able to resolve on first contact, whether or not they provide quality information to the caller. And you're going to want to keep the customer satisfaction survey relatively short, but do give each customer an opportunity not just to answer 1 through 5 on 5 or 6 questions. Give them a free form space on the survey where they can elaborate a little bit and tell you what else they are thinking, because oftentimes the greatest insights from a customer sat survey come from those free form comments and responses that you get, not just the 1 through 5 answers. From Al, regarding agent utilization, how do you equate bench time to agent utilization? Well, if they're working at a bench, for example, doing email or some other activity, that's the same as talk time or handle time. So bench time would factor into the calculation of agent utilization, just like handle time would factor into it for a voice agent. So let me make sure I'm understanding bench time correctly, though. If you could just type something in, Al, and tell me what you mean by bench time. I've heard it used in different ways, but generally when your bench time is when you're actually doing off-the-phone work. It might be email work, but it's usually, or it might be some back office type work, but it's usually you're engaged in some type of customer service activity. If bench time is time, where you're engaged in no customer activity, then that's a very different story. But if you are referring to things like handling emails, doing back office type stuff, then that gets worked into the utilization calculation just like call handle time would. Okay. Next question, where can I get the agent satisfaction survey? Send an email to MetricNet at info@metricnet.com, and I can send that to you, Joe. From Carmen, I would love an example of agent job satisfaction. Okay, just answered that question. If you're interested, send an email to info@metricnet.com. I can send you the sample agent job satisfaction survey. Okay, from John, it's not a question. It just says happy engineers equals happy customers. Okay, I guess I would agree with that. From Al, agent satisfaction has a direct relationship to retention. High turnover affects FCR due to increased time required for new agent training. That's absolutely true. High turnover means that your experienced people are walking out the door. Your FCR typically does suffer when the turnover is higher. So if we were to regress, and I've not done this in this particular presentation, but if we regress turnover versus FCR, I think what you would find is that the higher the turnover goes, the lower the FCR goes. So I would agree with you, Al. From Dolly, can we get access to the recording? Yes, absolutely. We're going to send you a link to a recording of today's webcast. Okay, from DJ, if you have multiple call center locations performing the same function for the same set of customers, do you recommend using a separate call center scorecard for each location or an overall call center scorecard or both? It depends on if the call centers, if the multiple call centers, DJ, are really clones of each other and they're doing exactly the same thing, you can do one overall call scorecard for the whole thing, but you will lose the granularity of how each individual call center is performing. So if you suspect that one call center or some call centers are not performing as well as others, I would suggest putting in place a scorecard that is unique to each location. That way it gives you the granularity and the visibility into each location, and hence helps you understand how each individual location is performing. If you suspect or know that they're all performing on par with each other, then all you need is one scorecard. But I would recommend going with individual scorecards for each location because it's going to give you a lot more insight and granularity into the performance of each individual location. Okay, from Lisa, do you have benchmark data for 24/7 dispatch centers for emergency commercial system repair? Yes, we do. We've got that in our benchmarking database. If you're interested, let me know. From Henrique, I've lost some slides of your speech. Where can I download the presentation? Henrique, just fill out the questionnaire, which will pop up when you leave the webcast, and we'll send that to you. From Al, how do I get access to the questionnaire you mentioned? Will it pop up when I close the seminar? Yes, it will. It's just Al, it's a real brief questionnaire, 3 questions that ask you essentially how you like today's webcast. Just fill that out, and we'll send you a copy of today's presentation. From Sylvia, do you think that a single question NPS, Net Promoter Score, is an effective way to manage customer satisfaction? It can be. Net Promoter Score, however, is more of a measure of loyalty. For those of you who don't know what NPS is, Net Promoter Score, on a scale of 1 to 10, you survey your customers, and a score of 9 or 10 indicates that they would refer you to one of their friends or family. So on a scale of 1 to 10, do you like this product? Do you like this service? Do you like this call center? If they answer 9 to 10, they are promoters. If they answer 7 or 8, they are neutral. And if they answer 1 through 6, they are detractors. And so what you do is you take your promoters minus your detractors, and you end up with a score between -100% and +100%. And Net Promoter Score is always, always, always way less than customer satisfaction score. It's not unusual to have a customer satisfaction score of, say, 90% and a Net Promoter Score of 10% or 20% or 30%. It's very difficult to get an NPS in excess of 50%. So in my opinion, Net Promoter is useful information, but it reflects more on loyalty than it does on satisfaction. So yes, it can potentially substitute for customer satisfaction, but if I had to choose between one or the other, Sylvia, I'd pick the customer sat survey because it tells me more. It's more indicative of what my customers think of my service. Ideally, if you do them both, NPS really tells you something about customer enthusiasm, which I've spoken about throughout this presentation. So NPS tells you about loyalty and enthusiasm. Customer satisfaction gives you an indication of how overall satisfied they were, but not necessarily how loyal they are in the sense that they would recommend you to friends or family. So I would not suggest replacing customer sat with NPS, but supplementing customer sat with NPS would be a good thing to do. Okay, from Linda, let's see, will we receive the survey link via email? The answer is no. The survey pops up when you leave the webcast, or at least it should. Okay, Al was talking about Tier 2 PC repair. So let me go back to your question, Al, and make sure I put this in context. Agent satisfaction is a direct relationship. It was even before that, I think. Regarding agent utilization, do you equate bench time with agent utilization? Okay, and you said Tier 2 PC repair. Okay, yeah, so bench time. They're turning a screwdriver, they're replacing a hard drive, they're re-imaging a device or something. Absolutely, that counts towards utilization, and it should count towards utilization. But it sounds more like desktop support than level 1 support, and maybe your techs do both, which is some organizations, tech support organizations, have technicians that do both remote support, i.e. level 1 service desk, as well as Tier 2 PC repair. And it sounds like you may work in that environment, but either way, the time that they spend at the bench should count towards their utilization. From Elmuis, I apologize if I mispronounced that. What is the best formula for service level? I'm not sure. Maybe you can elaborate on that question for me, because service levels can refer to speed of answer, it can refer to abandonment rate, it can refer to the percentage of calls answered in 10 or 20 or 50 or 60 seconds. So if you could elaborate on that question, I might be able to answer it a little bit more effectively. From Sylvia, can you correlate customer loyalty and satisfaction? There is, Sylvia, some correlation between those. If you go to MetricNet's website, assuming that you're a member, it's a free membership, premium membership, and you go to our resource page, and in the search engine, just type in NPS, Net Promoter Score. I did a metric of the month on Net Promoter Score a few months back, and I actually talked about the correlation between NPS and customer satisfaction. It's not as strong as you would think, surprisingly enough, and that's why my suggestion is you should look at, if you're going to look at NPS, make sure you also look at CSAT. If you're looking at customer sat by itself, that's adequate, but if you have to have NPS, make sure you also have customer satisfaction, because the correlation between loyalty or NPS and CSAT is not as strong as you might think. Okay, from Sylvia, okay, thanks, fantastic content presentation, I appreciate that. That was the last comment or question. If you have any questions or comments, please type them in. I'll stay on for another few seconds here if you do have any questions or comments. Otherwise, we'll wrap up our webcast. Okay, looks like we're done for the day. I just want to thank all of you once again for participating in MetricNet's Call Center Best Practices webcast. I do hope you found it to be informative and insightful. Please don't forget to complete the survey that will pop up when you exit the webcast. This is a survey from Citrix or GoToWebinar. It's just 3 questions. It takes about 15 seconds to answer. But we want you to answer that so that we get your candid feedback, and this is a requirement if you wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. So once again, I want to thank you. I really appreciate your time today. Good day. Goodbye now.